There's a certain kind of darkness that lurks beneath the surface of small towns. The kind that doesn't show itself on a postcard, the kind that is whispered about behind closed doors, with eyes glancing nervously over shoulders. For 25-year-old Rachel Mason, that darkness wasn't something she'd heard about, it was something she had lived through. And when the truth finally came to light, the town would be shaken to its core, forever altering the course of her life, and the lives of those who thought they had control. Rachel Mason was the last person anyone in the sleepy town of Dunbridge would have ever considered as a threat. Small, quiet, with unassuming brown eyes and a slight frame, she had always been dismissed as the town's underdog, someone who would never amount to anything. But to understand Rachel's story, you first have to understand the people who ruled Dunbridge, the Carson family. In Dunbridge, the Carsons were more than just a family. They were a legacy. Led by Walter Carson, a man whose charm was only matched by his ambition, the Carsons had their hands in everything, from the town's real estate to its schools, businesses, and even its churches. Their wealth and influence seemed unshakable. Walter Carson was the mayor and the self-proclaimed spiritual leader of the town's largest congregation, the Dunbridge Fellowship Church. To say he was powerful would be an understatement. He was a king, and Dunbridge was his kingdom. But Walter wasn't the only one in the family with power. His eldest son, Christian Carson, was an enigmatic figure in his own right. Handsome, articulate, and charismatic, Christian had inherited not only his father's ambition but also his ability to sway the minds of others. To many, Christian was the golden child, the one destined to carry the Carson legacy into the future. Rachel, on the other hand, had nothing but a broken home, a father who left when she was young, and a mother who worked herself to the bone just to keep the roof over their heads. But what Rachel lacked in resources, she made up for in heart. For as long as she could remember, Rachel had felt the sting of being on the outside. Her classmates would gather at the Carson family mansion for lavish parties and events, while Rachel watched from the sidelines, wondering what it would be like to belong. Rachel had always been drawn to the church, not because of the promises of salvation, but because it was the one place in town where everyone gathered. She had been told by her mother to steer clear of Walter Carson and his family. "Those people don't care about us, Rachel," her mother would often say. But there was something about the way Christian Carson had looked at her during one of the church services, a look that made Rachel feel, for the first time, that she wasn't invisible. It was at the age of 19 when Rachel first met Christian Carson. He was volunteering at a youth event at the church, and he took an immediate interest in her. He spoke to her with such ease, his words smooth and calculated, making her feel like she was the most important person in the room. He had the power to make people believe in him, and for the first time in Rachel's life, someone was paying attention. A few weeks after their first conversation, Christian invited Rachel to one of the church's private gatherings. He told her that he saw potential in her, that she had something special. At first, Rachel was hesitant. She had heard rumors about the Carson family's practices and their grip on the town. But the invitation felt like an opportunity she could not refuse. What Rachel didn't realize was that the private gatherings were not just casual meetings, they were rituals. And the group that gathered in secret under Walter Carson's watchful eye was not just a congregation, it was a cult. The members of the Fellowship Church were not merely followers of a faith, they were followers of Walter Carson. Everything in their lives, from their thoughts to their actions, was dictated by him and the mysterious, ever-growing doctrines he espoused. The more Rachel attended the meetings, the more she felt drawn to the Carson family's vision. Walter's sermons were powerful, filled with messages about cleansing the world of impurity, of using one's power to shape the destiny of the world. But it wasn't just the sermons that kept her coming back, it was Christian. He made her feel special, like she mattered, like she could be a part of something bigger than herself. As Rachel became more involved with the fellowship, she began to notice the changes in the people around her. They weren't the same. They were colder, more distant, their eyes glazed over with devotion. She started to hear whispers of people who had given up their entire lives for the cause, who had lost touch with their families and their dreams. And yet she couldn't escape it. The fellowship had become like a drug, and Rachel was addicted to it. It wasn't until a late-night meeting with Christian Carson that Rachel began to uncover the true nature of the cult. Christian, with his easy smile, began speaking of a new, purification ritual that had been proposed by his father. This ritual, he said, would ensure the town's future was secured, under the Carson name, of course. Rachel's curiosity grew, and she began to dig deeper, sneaking into private meetings, reading Walter's old journals, and talking to members who seemed to have been changed by the fellowship. The child he appeared to be. Beneath the charm and charisma lay a man obsessed with power, a man willing to do anything, murder, manipulation, betrayal, to ensure that the Carson family would reign forever. Dunbridge was a town that lived under the shadow of Walter Carson's influence. People went about their day-to-day lives, assuming everything was normal, gathering at the fellowship church on Sundays, going to work, meeting with friends. But there was always an undercurrent, a dark current, that swirled just beneath the surface. When Rachel started getting deeper into the fellowship's activities, she began noticing things, strange things. The purification rituals, as Christian and his father liked to call them, were nothing like the peaceful ceremonies of a regular church service. The air was thick with tension, and the atmosphere was cold, almost suffocating. Every Wednesday night, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, members of the fellowship would gather in a hidden room beneath the church. It was a room that no one ever talked about. The walls were bare, save for a few faded symbols etched into the stone. No one spoke about them either, until Rachel accidentally overheard Walter Carson and Christian talking about their cleansing process. The first time Rachel saw it, she could hardly believe her eyes. She'd been snooping around, gathering information, when she accidentally stumbled upon one of their meetings. Walter Carson was at the center, dressed in his usual impeccable suit, but his eyes were cold, empty. Christian was by his side, whispering in the ears of the chosen. Rachel watched as the followers, those who were considered the most loyal, lined up one by one, their faces blank and their eyes glazed over. The ceremony had begun. Christian spoke in a low, hypnotic voice, invoking phrases that sounded more like commands than prayers. Purify your soul. Let the darkness leave you. Embrace the light of the fellowship. Rachel watched in shock as one by one, each of the members fell to their knees. They shook violently, as though their bodies were being purged of something they couldn't see. Some of them screamed, others sobbed, but most simply went limp, as though in a trance. Then came the final part, the cleansing. Christian stood over them, holding a small, ancient-looking knife. It was used not for sacrifice, but for cutting the shackles from the soul. The ritual wasn't about blood, it was about control. Christian would make a small incision on their palms, a mark, to symbolize their commitment to the fellowship. That night, Rachel couldn't get the images out of her head. She had known that the fellowship was dangerous, but she didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole went. It wasn't just about following Walter's teachings, it was about creating slaves of the mind, binding people to a cause that was bigger than themselves. And Rachel had almost become one of them. It was around this time that Rachel began to feel the suffocating pressure of the cult's grip. She had made a vow to herself not to fall victim to their manipulations, but she couldn't help but admire Christian's commanding presence. He had a way of making everything seem so effortless, like he could bend anyone to his will with just a few carefully chosen words. But that was before she learned the true cost of disobedience. Evan Thompson was a man who had once been one of the fellowship's strongest supporters. He had been a believer, a true follower, and had helped organize the church's charity events and fundraisers. He was young, vibrant, and had dreams of making a real difference in the world. But he was also questioning. Something about Walter's teachings began to feel off to him, and he started asking questions. The more he asked, the more he began to see the inconsistencies in the Carson family's teachings. He became curious about the rituals, the way people were pressured to give everything to the fellowship. Evan started talking to Rachel, quietly at first. He confessed his doubts and fears. He mentioned how he'd overheard Walter and Christian planning something big for the future, something that didn't sit right with him. Evan was scared, and for good reason. One evening, when Rachel was at a gathering, she caught Christian and his father having an intense discussion. "He's asking too many questions," Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's becoming a liability." Rachel's heart dropped. She knew exactly who they were talking about. It was a rainy Thursday night when Evan went missing. One minute he was with Rachel at a local coffee shop, discussing the cult's practices, and the next, he was gone. The last thing Rachel remembered was Evan looking over his shoulder, a haunted look in his eyes, as if someone, or something, was following him. Christian had been too calm that night when Rachel asked about Evan. He offered her a sympathetic smile, almost as if he were pitying her ignorance. "Evan's just taken a break," he said, as if that explained everything. Sometimes people need space to grow. But Rachel knew better. Evan had been the most outspoken against the fellowship in recent weeks, and now he was gone without a trace. The next few days were a blur. Rachel searched for Evan, reaching out to his friends and family, but there were no answers. Then she received a chilling phone call. It was a blocked number. Rachel answered, her heart racing. Evan made a mistake. Christian's voice crackled through the line, cold and distant. "He got too close to the truth. But don't worry. We took care of it." Rachel's blood ran cold. She dropped the phone, her mind racing. What had Christian done to him? Rachel, desperate for answers, began digging. She snuck into the fellowship's archives, where Walter kept records of every member's participation, their purification rituals, and their confessions. What she uncovered sent a chill down her spine. There, among the pages, was Evan's name, marked with the same symbol as the others who had disappeared. But Evan's file was different. There was no note of a ritual, no record of his cleansing, or his commitment to the fellowship. There was only one sentence. Evan Thompson chose to leave the fellowship. His absence will be permanent. Rachel felt the ground slip out from under her. The cult wasn't just about brainwashing, it was about silencing anyone who dared to question it. As she pieced together the puzzle, Rachel realized the horrifying truth: Evan had been murdered. Christian had taken him out because Evan had threatened to expose the fellowship's true nature. And Rachel was next. As Rachel stood in the darkened room, the weight of the truth pressing down on her, she heard a soft knock on the door. Her heart skipped a beat. "Rachel," Christian's voice called from the other side, smooth and confident. "I think it's time you understood the true meaning of sacrifice. You've been so eager to uncover the truth, but some truths are better left buried." Rachel froze. The door slowly creaked open. But what stood behind it wasn't Christian. It was someone far worse, someone who knew exactly how far Rachel had gone in uncovering the cult's secrets. And they weren't alone. What would happen next? Was Rachel ready to face the full wrath of the Carson family? Or would she make the ultimate sacrifice to expose the truth?